thank you very much for this opportunity. And yeah, no, I was I'm trying to think, the class of 1981. That's a long time ago. My God. So here's my evolution to actually get to this moment in time. Born in UCLA Hospital, grew up here. I went to Hawthorne Elementary, which apparently doesn't exist anymore, and now Beverly Hills High School. Then went to Brown University, Stanford Law School. Came back to Los Angeles, clerked for a federal judge, and went right to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Those are the federal prosecutors. I got a chance to do, at a very young age, basically have justice be your client. It was a cool client. And so I did narcotics traffickers, prosecution, gang members, money launderers. I ran the environmental crime section and went after air, sea, and land polluters. I had the chance in the public corruption section to go after corrupt public officials and dirty cops. In fact, one of the cases that we did, it was actually pretty amazing, is that we went after an elite deputy sheriff unit that was accused of stealing drugs, guns, and money from drug dealers. And nobody believed the drug dealers. They figured they must be lying about it. Why would the cops basically be stealing drugs, guns, and money? So I was working with the FBI at the time, and we did an undercover operation. The FBI agents actually posed as drug dealers. And they wired a room with video and audio, and they had their drugs, guns, and money in the room. So these officers show up, they arrest them, and then we hear the officers talking about who's going to keep what and what they're going to actually turn in. So we basically busted one of them. Then we got that person to cooperate on someone else. Eventually we took down about 16 of these officers. And I got to do one of the trials, and it was fantastic. 10 years after I finished that job, I got a presidential nomination, a U.S. Senate confirmation. My kids got to go to the Senate Judiciary Committee and watch me being grilled by senators. A fun experience. But I got to run the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division. $100 million budget, 350 lawyers all over the United States. It was fantastic. Do any of you guys know the actor Wesley Snipes? Does that name ring a? Oh my God! Yes, I'm so old. Did you ever see Blade? Anyone ever see the Blade trilogy, the movies? No. Thank you. Thank you in the back there. Well, anyhow, we had a chance to prosecute a lot of different tax offenders out there, including Wesley Snipes. Then I had a chance to go back to Los Angeles, and I ran two big international law firms, government investigations practice. Basically got to defend people at that point. Then I got nominated to be the president of the LA City Ethics Commission, and that's basically holding city officials accountable. And with my brother, who's back here, class of '83, David, and we've got two sisters that are 85 and 86. He and I set up the LA Sheriff's Foundation. And the LA Sheriff's Foundation was set up in the defund the police movement in the summer of 2020. And we actually thought that police actually needed more resources rather than less. So we set up this foundation, raised them a whole lot of money, and we got to, for instance, go to the Air Rescue Squad. These are the sheriffs that go into the forest when people get lost, and you might have heard about that. They needed a drone. They didn't have enough money to buy a drone. So we got them this like $40,000 drone. They've saved 3 lives because of the drone that they never otherwise would have had. If you ever have the experience of being able to help the police out through a foundation or volunteering, it's amazing. I mean, one of the things that my brother and I have gotten a chance to do is go out with SWAT on search warrants at 2 in the morning. And they're going into places that they basically, these are usually sort of illegal operations that are operating in some community. They come in with the helicopters, with the full search warrant. Everyone is fully armed, and got the bulletproof vests and whatnot. I mean, your heart gets racing. It's 2 in the morning. You don't know what to expect on the other side of the door. And I'm watching these guys literally put their lives on the line to do their job. It's very inspiring. So I had a chance then to, with this background, I thought to myself, I've been married 31 years. I've raised 3 kids who are now in their 20s. And I thought to myself that the current DA is a guy who came in from San Francisco. His name is George Gascon. And he was the DA in San Francisco. And I don't know, have any of you folks actually been up to San Francisco in the last couple of years? Okay, I see one head nodding, thank God. San Francisco in the last couple of years is not the San Francisco of years past. Yeah, San Francisco used to be a very safe community. You could walk anywhere in San Francisco. Now, if you walk in certain parts of the downtown area, you're literally probably taking your life in your own hands. If not, you're certainly taking your property in your own hands, because the amount of theft that goes on, the amount of homeless crime that goes on in San Francisco is enormous. Well, the current DA of LA used to be the DA of San Francisco. And he did not go to do a good job in San Francisco. But he was then running for election here in 2020 against a woman. Her name was Jackie Lacey. She was the first African-American woman to hold the position of district attorney. She had over 30 years of experience, and George Gascon has actually 0 years of experience. He's actually never prosecuted or defended a single criminal case in his entire life, yet he's the top prosecutor. It's a little strange, I agree. We're actually making a bit of an issue of it, shall we say, in this campaign. Because again, I look at the situation, I think to myself that if you look at your community right now, and I don't know how you perceive it, but I'll tell you what statistically it's looking like, and you can tell me what you're experiencing. Statistically, the California Department of Justice reported on violent crimes, property crimes, hate crimes. They reported on fentanyl poisonings that'll kill more 18 to 35-year-olds than anything else out there, human trafficking and shoplifting. Over the 4 years that our current DA has been in place, and every year those crimes have risen, either double digits or shoplifting to 133%. You might have seen recently a social media video of 12 to 15-year-olds riding their bikes to the 7-Eleven on Olympic down by Pico Robertson. Someone's actually filming it. It's one of the kids. The reason I know this is one of the kids are actually filming it and posted it. They drop their bikes in front of the 7-Eleven, they run in, they grab as much stuff as they can, they run out, they stuff their pants, and they get on their bikes and go. It's the experience of crime that people are reacting to. And a lot of people, obviously not yourselves or your families, but there's a lot of people who just left LA. And it wasn't the high taxes. I mean, it's expensive to live here. It wasn't the traffic. A lot of traffic. It wasn't the smog. It wasn't the potential earthquakes that had gotten a lot of people to go. It was actually fear. Fear for the first time that a lot of people and their families are experiencing, whether it's fear of, for instance, if you go to certain places that used to be very safe, they might not be safe anymore. Or you go ahead and you go back to your car. Not that, let's see, there's probably a few 16-plus-olds here. If you're more than 16 or more, raise your hand. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, you go back to your car, and your car is now the statistic. The statistic of a car that got broken into in LA County. Or you go back to your home, and my home got broken into about 3 years ago, so my wife won't let me actually go into the house unless we've checked the Ring cameras to make sure that there's no one there. And that's not normal. I mean, it's not normal for kids to be stealing and ransacking a 7-Eleven. It's not normal to be checking the Ring cameras before you enter your home. The problems are even bigger based on this current DA. Because what he did is he showed up on that first day, first hour, and issued his first email. I mean, picture that. You're in power for 2 minutes, and you issue an email. Now, who is he sending that email to? Well, remember, he has 0 experience. He's never done the job of actually being in a courtroom with a judge, a jury, a verdict, evidence, and witnesses. But he's telling 800 of his prosecutors, it's a big job. You got 800 of these prosecutors do all the courts across this county how to do their job. Now, did he listen to them? No. Did he ask them questions? No. Did he see what's going right or wrong and try to either improve it or fix it? No. He imposed 9 special directives in that email that basically told his prosecutors that there are certain crimes and certain criminals that will no longer be prosecuted, even if the facts and the law justify that prosecution. So let me give you a couple examples. We talked about one already. Juveniles, that's people under 18, committing misdemeanors. That is basically, with theft, stealing just under $950. Because the law divides two different basic classifications of crimes. There's misdemeanors, which is sort of the low-end crimes, and felonies, the higher-end crimes. So, under $950, that's a misdemeanor. Over $950, that's a felony. The DA says on day one, we're no longer prosecuting people under the age of 18 for stealing just under $950. Now, I don't know if any of you even knew that that was one of his policies. Not that I'm encouraging anyone under 18 to go out and steal just under $950, but if you did, you would not be prosecuted by the DA's office, which is why 50, 12 to 15-year-olds went ahead and did that, and that's not the first time that has happened. If you've ever been checking your social media, these notions of flash mobs going ahead and robbing stores all over, CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aids, small stores, big stores. I mean, then it progresses up to smash and grab robberies. You might have seen that in department stores. Then it goes ahead and does these car break-ins, home break-ins, and you might have heard of what happened in downtown LA a couple months ago. There was an actor, and the way I remember his last name is because it rhymes with actor. His last name was Wachter, Johnny Wachter. He'd been on a whole bunch of TV shows, and he was in his sort of mid-30s, and in between acting gigs, he'd work as a bartender. And he was downtown working at a bartender. It's 3 a.m. at night. He just wants to go home. So he goes back to his car with a coworker, and he sees three guys stealing his catalytic converter. Clearly, they're under his car stealing his catalytic converter. He steps in front of his coworker, and he says, "What's going on?" And one of the guys grabs a gun and shoots him dead. That is what a spiral of lawlessness looks like. When you have a DA that says up front, we're just not going to prosecute certain crimes and certain criminals. So what would I do differently? Here's what I would do differently. I reject extreme policies. George Gascon calls what I just described decarceration. That's a policy that says that, again, we're going to release violent and serious criminals before they serve their full sentences, and we're not going to prosecute them to the full extent of the law on the front end. That's an extreme pro-criminal policy. I reject that. It has failed. But I also reject the other end of the political or the sort of the pendulum swing spectrum, which is called mass incarceration. You might have heard about this. Very popular in the 1990s. And that was, again, the same type of principle that says, I don't care what the facts in the law are. We're just going to put as many people as we can in prison for as long as we can. Mass incarceration, extreme policy. I reject that one as well. So where do I come down? I come down where fair-minded prosecutors have come down for decades. And I call it, it's the middle, but I call it the hard middle. Because you actually have to do hard work. It's easy and lazy if you have blanket policies because you never have to look at the facts of the law. You just have a policy and apply it. But the hard middle says you've got to look at each case individually. Look at each individual defendant and the defendant's background. Look at the crime committed and look at the impact on the victim to determine who the true threats are to our public safety. And often those are repeat offenders. People who have committed a crime, been convicted, came back and did it again, been convicted, now they're back for the third time. Those are your repeat offenders, and the repeat offenders have to be behind bars because nothing else has worked for these folks. But then there's the first-time nonviolent offender. It could be your kids. It could be someone just going ahead and committing a crime for the first time, and not a violent crime. And in those situations, you've got to figure out a punishment that's proportional to the crime. So that might be non-prison ideas. You could do community service. Basically, pick up trash on the side of the freeway. That'll be your punishment. You could go ahead and do, for instance, restitution. So if you steal something, pay it back. And if that means you have to pay it back every week for the next 2 years until it's paid back, pay it back. That's your punishment. Or for the people who are suffering serious drug addictions, we'll give them a choice. You can go ahead and go to prison. That's one of your choices. Or you can do an 18-month rehab program. And you have to do it with urine testing, AA meetings, 1 day at a time. And if you somehow through a lot of work, get through all 18 months, and you are clean and sober, the judge will hand you a certificate and wipe your record clean of the crime. That is the hard middle approach to figuring out the appropriate punishment for the crime, but also holding these folks and everyone accountable for their actions. Because ultimately, what is the point of the criminal justice system? Is it to lock up everybody till the prisons are bursting at the gills? No. If anything, that is the failure of the criminal justice system. So let me teach you then today what the true effective measure of it is. It's called deterrence. I need to set up rules and laws and lines that are so clear, and then consistently, fairly, and impartially enforce those lines and put the real consequences on the other side of the line, that I convince the criminals not to commit the crimes in the first place. That is a true measure of an effective criminal justice system. Because if the criminals aren't committing those crimes, you just saved a whole lot of people they're going to victimize from being victims. And you might say to me, Mr. Hochman, is that even possible? It sounds like a dream where you can deter criminals through the actual laws. I mean, is there a time you can point us to where that actually worked? That's easy to do. Because it's not the 1960s or 70s, because I'm so darn old when I grew up. It's actually 2014, in your guys' age range. In 2014, 10 years ago, was considered our safest year in the last 50 years. So what was going right then, it's not going right today. Well, you had a DA who was doing her job. That was Jackie Lacey. You had law enforcement that understood that the DA would be their partner and allow them to do their jobs, so they were doing their jobs. You had victims that if they actually got victimized, they could call 911, and they would find out that someone would answer the phone and actually get them justice for the harm they suffered. And as importantly, there was a fourth group out there, and those were the criminals. And the criminals understood in that year that the lines were real, that they actually did the crimes, they would be held accountable, and in record numbers, they weren't committing the crimes 10 years ago. So we need to get back there. The current DA, with his decarceration extreme policies, he will never get us back there. It's unfortunate, because he highlighted a lot of problems in the system. You might have heard about these problems, and I will inherit these problems as DA, and I will have to deal with them. So there are situations where the police, in the past, but I would say even potentially in the present, have notions that are not fair. They're not open-minded. They might view, for instance, black or Hispanic defendants and criminals differently than they view white defendants. And if that happens in the system, the DA's office has to expose that and has to deal with that head on. You cannot pretend it does not exist. And if a law enforcement officer crosses the line and commits a crime, DA's office got to move quickly. You've got to basically say that we will not allow law enforcement officers to commit crimes. Because when I talk to the law enforcement, you know what they tell me? They tell me that basically, when it comes to good cops and bad cops, that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. And the reason's quite simple. For all those law enforcement officers, and that's the overwhelming majority of them, who are running into the building when the bullets are flying to keep us safe, those officers deserve our respect, our admiration, and if I'm the DA, our partnership. But for the ones, those bad cops out there, they need to be dealt with and basically taken out of commission so they don't ruin the reputation for everybody else. So, our current DA comes in talking the big talk that he's going to do this. He hasn't walked the walk. He hasn't actually enacted the criminal justice reform that he said he was going to do, and he's completely failed when it comes to keeping us safe. And I absolutely believe that we can do both. I can prioritize public safety while doing real and effective criminal justice reform. So, let me answer a question that I know is on your list. It was coming up. How am I going to win this race? I know that question's coming up, and let me tell you exactly how I'm going to win it. Because in any political race, there are generally 3 metrics that you can measure it by, and then there's sort of 4th and 5th and 6th. But let me give you the big 3. Fundraising. Because the reason you have to fundraise in these elections is that I have to reach 3.7 million people in this county. We got 10.5 million people who live in this county. This is LA County. LA City is one of 88 cities in the county. There's 125 unincorporated areas in this county. This county has 4,000 square miles, and the reason I know that is I've driven a good chunk of that. And it's an amazing county. It goes all the way from Long Beach to LA, to Malibu, Westlake, Lancaster, Santa Clarita, down to Santa Monica, over to the San Gabriel Valley, and then the San Fernando Valley as well. This is a great county. It's an amazing county. There's over 100 different countries of origin that are represented in LA County. LA County is so big that if it was a state in the United States, it would be the 8th largest state, which means as the DA, I'm effectively the Attorney General of the 8th largest state. The DA has a budget of $460 million, 2,100 employees, and does over 180,000 criminal cases every single year. So this is an important position and a powerful position. And just as George Gascon changed criminal justice in favor of criminals, we can restore it back to that hard middle approach. So, Gascon on election night, primary election night, March 5th, there were 12 people running. Now there's 2. There was originally Gascon and 11 challengers, now there's Gascon and Hochman. I'm the last guy standing for this November 5th runoff. And he got 25% of the vote. That's it. That's a historic low. No DA sitting for re-election has ever gotten so few votes. So my task has been to unify 75% of the people out there who cut across every political, demographic, and geographic line. I've talked to ultra-left Democrats, independents, far-right conservatives. I've spoken to black, white, Latino, Asian organizations. I've spoken to people from every different religion. I have been in Sikh Gurudraras, black churches, Latino churches, Korean churches. We have been up with the Chinese American community. We've gone to Lancaster to mega churches. And I love bakeries. I have been to so many bakeries across this county that I have to exercise a lot, or else I would be I'd put on a lot of weight. The whole point is that in talking to all these people, this might be something that you can appreciate. They don't agree on much, but they do agree on one thing, that George Gascon was given 3.5 years to run his social experiment with our safety, and it's failed. That they feel less safe today than when he came into office. And then when they hear about my 34 years of criminal justice experience, this hard middle approach based on achieving deterrence, they're saying, great, this guy sounds like he can get the job done and he's going to get our vote. So we have raised a huge amount, a record amount of money on the fundraising. We have over 500 endorsements, and we had some polling that came out recently. Now, who here is a subscriber to the LA Times? 1, 2. This is why the LA Times is going down in the toilet. So we've got 3 people who subscribe, and probably just the online version is my guess. Is that right? Yeah. Well, I had to renew my subscription to the LA Times in order to see the poll, because the LA Times hasn't written a critical editorial about Gascon in 3.5 years, and they've endorsed it. But they released a poll about 10 days ago, and it shows that I'm 30 points ahead. Now, I only need 1 point ahead. I'm not greedy. I'll take 30. But what I view 30 points ahead is, it's really, we approach it like we're 30 points behind. Because every day you never know what can happen, and we have to keep the pedal down to the floorboard all the way to November 5th in order to win this race. So I very, very much appreciate you folks taking the time. Because what I'd ask of you is something very interesting and hopefully simple, but enormously effective. There's probably, let's call it 50 people in this room right now. But I don't see 50 people. I see 50,000 people. Because the power of technology, the power of networking is such that if you folks, even if you can't vote, and I'm assuming a whole bunch of you can't vote, you know people who can vote. You post, you text, you email, you can talk up an election in your classes with your parents. And you have now actually been given some information about the DA's race, and I would argue you now know more about the DA's race than probably 95% of the people out there, maybe even higher. And you've actually taken the time and effort to meet a candidate. And if I make sense to you, then if you become effectively the ambassadors for that message, the 50 or so people here can easily become 50,000 people. And if any of you know an influencer or two, and I hope you do, and they have, hundreds of thousands of people on their social media, the 50,000 people can become 500,000 people. That is the power that all of you have to actually spread a message if you agree with it. And if you do agree with it, I'd be incredibly appreciative if you would spread it, because we have the election 3 weeks from today. Though everybody who is registered has a ballot on their kitchen table, or they've already mailed it in. I mean, that's just the nature of California, circa 2024. So let me stop now. Let me take any questions you have, because, I went to high school here 43 years. I'm so old. Well, I went here 43 years. I graduated 43 years ago. This is a fantastic place. I look back on my high school years, and my brother does too, and we were incredibly fortunate, so fortunate to get an education here. The reason I came back, and this is the only high school that I will be speaking to, is because that education meant so much to me, and you were so fortunate to have it. So hopefully what I've been talking about has been making a little sense, but as importantly now, let's open it up for some questions. Be brutal. I will do my best to answer questions any of you have. Yes?
So, on your website, you seem to have a hardline stance that justice is not political. However, you ran for California Attorney General as a Republican just 2 years ago. What changed? If your morals haven't, then does that not show a willingness to sacrifice what you believe for a chance to seize power? Furthermore, you served with George W. Bush, a Republican president. Why should I buy that you are truly neutral?
I love this question. And by the way, that is exactly what my opponent is bringing up. Because normally a DA running for re-election like Gaston, he'd be saying he has more experience than his opponent. He can't say that. He has 0 years, I have 34 years. He can't run on his record of public safety because it's a record of public safety failure. So he has tried to politicize this race, say it's a Democrat versus a former Republican, because somehow that matters. It's interesting. Criminals don't ask for your party affiliation when they rob or they shoot you. Victims shouldn't be asked for their party affiliation when you want to actually help them. You shouldn't just help Democratic victims or Republican victims. The job of the DA is actually to unify everybody, not divide them. But I'm going to answer your question head on because Gaston keeps raising it, even though I've said that argument is irrelevant as to whether or not I can help keep you and your family safe. So, my political background, which if you actually looked a little bit deeper into the Google search, you would have found, because I've said it now, about in 15 TV radios, podcasts, social media, in every form I can possibly say what I'm about to say to you. So I spent the first 20 years as a registered Democrat. I spent the next 20 years as a centrist Republican. And basically, I've been a centrist my whole life. I voted for the person over the party the entire time. But now it comes time for the DA election. This election, unlike the last election, is for a nonpartisan position. That means that party affiliation is not even going to be on the ballot. You won't know if Gaston's a Democrat, an independent Republican, or myself. It's not on the ballot because you don't want politics dominating the decision-making of your DA. You actually want your DA to be independent, so I decided to register as an independent to send the message to people exactly how I would run the office. Gaston is running the office differently. He's put his political agenda ahead of the facts and the law in deciding whether or not his office even prosecutes certain crimes and certain criminals. But let me tell you a little bit more because you asked the question. I've been pro-choice my entire life. I've been pro-LGBTQ rights my entire life. And what Gaston didn't tell you is that he spent his first 38 years as a Republican. 38 years. He spent the next 13 as a Democrat. So when he says the race is a Democrat versus the former Republican, I assume he's talking about himself as a former Republican, because he's been a former Republican longer, almost twice as long as I have, and I've been a Democrat in my life almost twice as long as he has. So again, and let me just go even one more step further. I said when I was running as a Republican out loud that I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016, I didn't vote for him in 2020, and I wasn't voting for him in 2024. And again, anyone who's done a decent level of Google search on my name and all this, or gone to my website and looked this stuff up, would see everything I just said. So I've literally said it at this point dozens and dozens of times. But what happens is, unfortunately, you just get that little snippet that you have. And I'm so glad you brought it up, because a lot of people are working off that little snippet. And that little snippet is why people have concerns that maybe he really isn't a centrist. Maybe he's some conservative Republican, because that's what Gaston keeps calling me over and over and over again. I've even said that I'll be voting for Kamala Harris in this particular election. So, you ask yourself that now. Do I sound like some conservative Republican? Or do I sound like someone who's voted for the person of the party his entire life and is a centrist and will run the DA's office independent of politics? As I've said, and if you look at how I've run anything else in my life, what I say I'm going to do is ultimately what I've ended up doing. So thank you very much for the question. Other questions?
We have a couple here. Class is going to begin soon, so if you do have a class to get to, I would encourage you to get to that class, but we do have a couple on this form. Specifically this one, we've all seen the increases in anti-Semitism and other forms of hate crimes in recent months. What would you do to ensure that this trend stops? Okay,
great question, and here's the answer to that. I'm a big believer in the First Amendment, and if you want to go in front of the federal building as an example and go to the sidewalk and scream things out loud that I find vile and reprehensible, not only do you have the right to do it, but I will protect that right. But when words turn into illegal conduct, that's when the DA needs to be heard loud and clear on where the lines are and where the consequences are. So if you want to go ahead and take your protest, but you want to shut down a freeway, you're going to be held accountable. If you want to shut down the airport, you're going to be held accountable. If you want to go ahead and shut down a college campus and deny people the right to get an education there, you're going to be held accountable. And if you want to engage in violent acts, as people are trying to enter a synagogue in Pico Robertson, you're absolutely going to be held accountable. And when Gaston stays silently on the background, particularly in that last act, when people were being violently attacked, Mayor Bass came in and said those actions are abhorrent. Gavin Newsom came in and said those actions are completely unacceptable. George Gaston came in and said those actions are, well, actually didn't say anything. And therefore, you had the next situation where these same protesters are shutting down the 405 freeway in the middle of rush hour traffic. Because if you don't believe that the DA is actually going to do his job and that the lines are going to get enforced, you'll just keep going until you get to the point where finally something's going to happen. And often what happens at that point is somewhat tragic. We do not need to get to that point. We just need a DA to say, here are the lines. Here are the consequences. If you want to violate the line and the law, these are the consequences you will experience, so don't commit the crime in the first place. That's what deterrence is all about.
My mom was personally attacked at the Pico Robertson rally outside the shul.
Right, and again, it's if they cross the lines, they have to be held accountable. And that hard middle approach doesn't mean you're going to put them in jail for 100 years. But they're absolutely going to know that, look, these are the laws you're violating, criminal laws. You're going to go through the process. You're going to get arrested. We're going to find out a proportional punishment to your crime, but we're not going to pretend that you didn't commit a crime.
Maybe just one more question. I think very often we see on TV that there'll be a certain violent crime that's committed. Whenever they get to the criminal, he'll have a rap sheet longer than like the standard chemistry textbook. And very often he's out on bond, so he was supposed to be, he's awaiting trial anyway. How do we deal with repeat offenders? And I feel like that's where the majority of crime comes from, so maybe that adds significance to the question.
You know, your intuition is absolutely right. They estimate that 20% of people commit about 60% of crimes. So if you can eliminate the repeat offenders, you're going to take a huge chunk out of criminal activity in our community. So how do you do it? Again, the way you do it is you don't pretend that certain crimes haven't been committed, or you find a punishment that isn't proportional to the crime committed. And that requires work. That's where the discretion, the collective thousands of years of experience comes into play, where you figure, and the evidence comes into play. Because it might be, I had a case, for instance, and I'll conclude on this notion. I had a case once when I was a prosecutor. I had a videotaped confession. It was perfect. The guy confessed to everything. But as I dug into the case, I realized that those Miranda warnings that actually should have been given, although I thought they had been given, were not given. And I had to make a tough call. There was no doubt in my mind that that person committed the crime. But I didn't have legally admissible evidence to actually prove it, and we had to actually dismiss the charges at that point. We did it without the court even telling us. Because there's an old adage out there that I've taken very personally, and you should too. It says that the prosecution always wins when justice is done. It doesn't say this is from the U.S. Supreme Court. It doesn't say the prosecution always wins when you get a conviction. Because there are times when the evidence does not hit beyond a reasonable doubt, where the evidence is legally inadmissible. And even though you know for certain that the person did the crime, you just can't prove it. And in those cases, justice is actually done, even though a conviction was not obtained. So again, I'm running for this office because I refuse to move. I refuse to be live in a community that has gone in the wrong direction when I have a fairly unique skill set that can hopefully make a difference. And if you folks are able to help get the word out in any way, shape, or form, I'm eternally grateful. So thank you. Thank you all very, very much.